We got brand new reporting on special counsel Jack Smith's election interference case against Donald Trump and how, in the waning days of 2020, Trump's vice president, Mike Pence, almost caved to the big lie. According to ABC News, quote, with the pressure on Pence mounting, he concluded on Christmas Eve, just for a moment, that he would follow Trump's suggestion and let someone else preside over the proceedings on January 6th, writing in his notes that doing otherwise would be, quote, too hurtful to my friend, end quote. Not feeling like I should attend electoral count, Pence wrote in his notes in late December. Too many questions, too many doubts, too hurtful to my friend. Therefore, I'm not going to participate in certification of election, end quote. Then, sitting across from the table from his son, a Marine, while on vacation in Colorado, his son said to him, Dad, you took the same oath I took. It was an oath to support and defend the Constitution, Pence recalled to Smith's investigators, sources said. That's when Pence decided he would be at the Capitol on January 6th after all, according to the sources. Joining our conversation is the former lead investigator for the January 6th Select Committee, Tim Heaphy, is here. Also, the former acting U.S. Solicitor General, Neil Katyal. Gentlemen, good to see you both. Thank you for being with us. Tim, let me start with you. This is it's a little hard to keep track of what Mike Pence said to whom, because Mike Pence has spoken publicly. He's written a book. He's said other things to the committee, and all of it's juicy and interesting. But this new reporting from ABC seems to put yet more meat on the bones of the confusion and the conversations that took place between Mike Pence and Donald Trump. What conclusions does any of this lead you to that you hadn't already come to?
You know, candidly, Ali, not much. It is more interesting anecdotes that reaffirm the same core principle, which is that Mike Pence was among a chorus of people who told the president repeatedly that he lost the election and that there was no legal path forward, right? The sort of internal struggle that he had and deliberations as to whether or not he should or shouldn't sit out the joint session, are interesting. People go through lots of scenarios when they're trying to make a hard decision. He arrived at the right place, and as apparently his son advised him, he upheld his oath to the Constitution, which was higher to his loyalty to his friend. It's really interesting to me in that quote that he literally personalizes this to, it would be hurtful to my friend. So it doesn't really materially, it sort of advance the core understanding of what happened, other than a little bit of color and anecdote that was a bit beyond what we had gotten at the Select Committee.
So, Neil, there are a few things in there that are interesting that may have legal application. One of them is, as we often say, commas save lives. There's this whole discussion about comma placement. Let me read this from the article. Sources said that investigators' questioning became so granular at times that they pressed Pence over the placement of a comma in his book. When recounting a phone call with Trump on Christmas Day 2020, Pence wrote in his book that he told Trump, comma, I don't think I have the authority to change the outcome of the election on January 6th. But Pence allegedly told Smith's investigators that the comma should never have been placed there. According to sources, Pence told Smith's investigators that he actually meant to write in his book that he admonished Trump, I don't think I have the authority to change the outcome, suggesting that Trump was well aware of the limitations of Pence's authority days before January 6th, a line Smith includes in his indictment. So to Tim's point, Mike Pence's internal struggle aside, he's saying to Jack Smith's investigation, I told Trump that he knows that this can't happen. I'm one more person who told Donald Trump he has to leave office.
That's exactly right. And so as the greatest living artist, Lin-Miranda, has said in Hamilton, the placement of a comma changes everything. And, you take the comma story, that excerpt that you just showed, along with all the other things in this report. And to me, I disagree a little bit with Tim. I think, right, substantively, all of this has come out in various other testimony. But to me, the big news here is that this story, to me, says former Vice President Pence is going to testify in a criminal trial against the person who he served as when he was vice president, former president of the United States. That's a big deal for the litigation. It's a big deal historically. And it is striking to me that we are learning about all these details now, 3 years later, basically. I mean, a guy tries to launch a coup as the sitting president, and another guy, Pence, is witness to all this, and that witness dribbles out various things over the last 3 years. I mean, it's not as bad as Trump, but it's of the same ilk. And, you know, when it comes to the 2020 election, you can either stand on the right side of history or stand by the side of Donald Trump. And Michael Pence has been acting like these aren't mutually exclusive. The story today, to me, says absolutely they are. Pick one.
Yeah, I mean, he's definitely staked out a side on this thing that is unlike anyone else's. Tim, let's carry on that conversation, right? The comma was interesting and is intriguing in terms of intent and what he believed Donald Trump knew. But then he says, I'm going to continue from the article, according to sources, when Pence spoke with Smith's team earlier this year, he said Trump's words that morning, meaning January 6th morning, didn't help. And he said Trump acted recklessly as the Capitol was under siege. But Pence also said he will never believe Trump meant for January 6th to be violent. So in the vein of what we were just talking about, Mike Pence is able to straddle every line that has ever been invented. Here again, he's saying he knew Donald Trump wanted to stay in office. He told him that that wasn't doable. And he was an aggravating factor in January 6th, but he didn't think it was going to be violent.
Yeah, there's a pretty fine line legally between what's intentional and what's reckless. So maybe he's parsing that fine line that President Trump didn't specifically intend for the crowd to be violent. But he certainly acted recklessly in telling an angry crowd that he knew was armed that they needed to fight like hell or they wouldn't have a country anymore, directing the crowd's attention at his vice president, who had told him repeatedly that he had no choice under the law but to certify the official electors from each state. So is that intentional? Is that reckless? It doesn't matter legally. It all demonstrates an intent to disrupt the joint session. That's all Jack Smith has to prove to obtain a conviction on the charged counts was, did the president intend take action that reflects an intent to obstruct, impede, or interfere with an official proceeding, the January 6th certification. I think Neil's right in that the notes that Mike Pence took in his statements to the special counsel, as reported by ABC, provide further evidence of intent, and it is a big deal that the vice president himself would be a witness against the president. But it all reinforces the core theory that we developed, that Jack Smith will develop. He had the intent to disrupt that joint session.
And when you look at Jack Smith, Neil, when you look at the indictment, while the violence was remarkable because we watched it unfold and we can all come to our conclusions about this idea of whether it was reckless or whether it was intentional, it's not central to Jack Smith's argument about what Donald Trump did. The ability to not have people understand that their vote would be counted and be important, the ability to not recognize the outcome of the election. That's what it's all about. In the end, whether or not Trump thought he was inciting violence is sadly secondary.
That's exactly right. Tim made that point so well, and you're making it as well. I think the key to understanding this is Trump is charged. The violence is just essentially gravy for the prosecutors. They don't need to prove that. The charge is a conspiracy to obstruct an official proceeding. And Trump did that. Forget about the violence. He did it by trying to pressure Trump not to show up on January 6th, so much so that evidently required his son to remind him of his constitutional oath, which I find baffling. If you're a high government official, that you'd need that, but evidently he did. Trump did that by having this fake alternative electors thing, which is not a thing in our Constitution, and all the other stuff. The violence was just one of many mechanisms, and that's why Tim has, and his committee has developed that theory, and I expect Jack Smith and Fani Willis to both push that as well. And of course, there is some evidence that Trump may have intended the violence. I mean, removing the magnetometers on January 6th, it's a little hard for me to understand what was going on besides violence.